welcome to NASSCOM Technology and Leadership Forum 2024. I'm Manisha Nair-Dhawan. There's a lot of buzz and excitement about Gen AI, but there is also one set of people who are worried that Gen AI will mean a future full of robots and you will not have the same human experience that you're used to now. I have with me Nathalie Nahai, author, Web of Influence, joining us now. Thank you so much, Nathalie, for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
I'm trying to understand with Gen AI, what happens to the human element? Because we're used to talking to humans, we're used to that connection. But now we are seeing the technology is becoming smarter. And what we have only seen in science fiction is now becoming a reality in some places. So is there a place for that same human connection when Gen AI is all over?
Yes, so I think one of the biggest things that generative AI and AI in general is making us think about is what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to belong? What does it mean to have a meaningful life? Where does automation and the optimization for efficiency reach its limits? Do we want to make sure that everyone is living the most efficient, productive life possible? Or are there another set of values that we think are really important when we're living in the world? And of course, this question is a very complex one. It's a very interesting one. It depends on who you are, where in the world you live, your culture, the kind of business you're in, the industry you're in. But I think if you're thinking about things like universal traits that regardless of culture and age we find important, the ability to love, to have meaningful relationships, to feel yourself part of the web of life, these are some of the questions that I think are absolutely vital that we ask ourselves in terms of how does technology create societies that we want to live in, not how do we adapt to technology as it runs ahead of us. It's like, what's the world we want to build? How can technology serve that vision in a way that we support the flourishing of all life?
But who gets to decide what kind of society we build? Because I know my life, I know I want to connect with people, but somebody feels that this is an efficient way of doing it. Who decides what kind of society we should have? And would that impact how technology, develops from here on? Because AI also is dependent on the data that you feed it and how you train it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so that's the million-dollar question, right? So different countries will have different answers to that question. For instance, if you're thinking about neurotechnology and how we use technology to help people in the best case scenarios who don't have mobility, and you're using technology to interface directly with the brain to create possibilities for movement or for control or for language. In Chile, there are some really interesting legal structures to help protect citizens against being put at risk by some of these advances. So that's an example of one country making certain decisions for their population. The question then becomes political, right? So it's like, who gets to decide? Is it something that we create citizens' assemblies to say, okay, well, most of the population in this area want to live in this way? Or is it something that technology companies get to decide, or governments without the engagement of their citizens? Every different area in the world will have different answers to that. And I think one of the biggest challenges and opportunities now is to figure out also politically what are the systems that we want to create in order to be able to have greater collective decision-making power over the worlds that we're going to experience and inhabit. And so that kind of, again, it's this question of not just what technology do we want to build, but do the structures we live in now create possibility for human flourishing? Who gets to decide that? And how do we engage on a deeper, more democratized level with those decisions?
Yeah, there's also a lot of talk about responsible AI and governance and ethics. There is a lot of clamor of let's have rules and how to play it right, and so that there is no misuse of this technology. Do you think, technology is the same everywhere, right? But how it's applied in a different society makes it very different, right? So can you have global regulations, global rules that apply everywhere in the same way, or do you need to have localized rules to ensure that this is not being misused?
That's such a good question. I don't envisage that global rules will come into effect, just because if we look at the ways historically in which different markets have regulated to achieve their own advantages, if we look at, for instance, Europe versus the US in terms of AI regulations, Europe as a mass could be seen to be much more conservative, and yet you're also seeing people move. I live in Barcelona in Spain, but I'm originally from London. You're seeing lots of people move from other countries where there are different regulations to Europe, and not just, also from Europe to other places, depending on their own personal values. So we're going to see people move with their feet, with their families, from specific markets to those where they feel more aligned. So I think we're always going to have variety, at least that's my anticipation, is that we're always going to have variety in terms of different communities and different country blocks. The interesting thing is that typically people make decisions, businesses make decisions based on where they have the greatest financial advantage. If it shows that in more conservative regulated areas like Europe, people have greater trust in AI, consumers are more willing to give their data to AI, and therefore the long-term business outcome is better.
Even if it's more expensive short term. Right,
yes. Then you're going to see an incentive from a business and financial perspective to become more conservative. That's one example. But then different cultures have different needs, desires, anticipations. So if you look at China, where you have social credit scores, in one context, in a cultural context there, is perfectly acceptable. If you try to transplant that into a UK context, where it's, well, I'm not going to go into the details, where it's less socially acceptable, you also have to kind of bring into mind what people will and will not accept in terms of their expectations. So it's a whole multitude of factors. So I think plurality is going to be the way forward.
Right. What about skills? Because Gen AI requires different kind of skills. And since the pandemic, we are hearing about let's upskill, whether you lost your job or whatever, you have to upskill because technology is changing so fast. You have to learn how to make it work best for you. What are the skill sets that will be required, and what are the cultural changes in workplaces that will be required?
So that depends on the legislations that are implemented to protect jobs or not. If we're thinking about, in the last 6 months, some of the predictions that big companies have offered in terms of which are going to be the skills that will put you in the best stead for future jobs, things like soft skills, like reading people's behaviors, communication, creativity, and you look at things like OpenAI's Sora that can create, films in a matter of days or hours, depending on your abilities to prompt. We're seeing that AI, generative AI, is able to replace, to a large extent, many of those soft skills or creative skills that only 6 months ago we said would be protected. So the question is, well, where does that leave us? And again, we're back to legislation. So if you have a sense where you have governments recognizing the fact that if you create a jobs market in which the vast number of jobs that we currently have are able to be fulfilled by AI, then you leave a huge population who are not able to work, who don't contribute to the economy, who then are needing to potentially make use of government support. And so then we're in a situation of, just because we can use technology to replace all of these human jobs, actually, will it completely cannibalize entire economies and therefore political security and therefore societal stability? So again, it's the question of, what are the longer term impacts of outsourcing the vast majority of our jobs to AI? Who gets to benefit? And what are the costs? And so then the question becomes a political and societal question again. So I think most of the jobs that we currently fulfill from a human capacity, we could potentially replace with AI. The question is, what are the benefits and the detriments, and who gets to decide? In terms of our psychological needs, there will always be the desire to belong, to connect, to grow, to be encouraged to express ourselves, to have human contact. And I think even if, and I'm a big fan of Star Trek, I grew up watching Star Trek, even if we can create somatically convincing holograms or robots that feel like humans or whatever, there will be something that is missing that we will long for, that will not be, at least within several lifetimes I expect, that will not be able to be replicated by AI. And I think part of that is something which we have to recognize as the human experience. So what does it mean to be in real relationship with something that we can't predict, that's going to challenge us, that invites us to step into those edges where perhaps we're less comfortable and we're not going to get what we want all the time. Like, it's again about the human experience, and I think that's where the interesting questions come.
Can you stop technology from adoption? You can't. So, in a country like India, we don't have social support. Then what happens? We have millions of people entering the workforce every year.
Yeah.
So, but can you stop technology?
No, but you can direct the courses into which it runs. And it's always going, I think the main thing for me is to make sure that the ways in which it's going to run are not just decided by a small minority of finance-driven corporations. Like, it has to be embedded within a set of human values, and there has to be the ability to course correct and to make changes, which also, and I know this isn't popular, means thinking more wisely and with more consideration and with greater time, like to slow things down a little bit so we can make much better decisions. If we don't do that, we'll end up with really big problems.
I don't know if anything's slowing down.
Nothing's slowing down, right? I mean.
But what do you think is a technology or an AI trend that will have the most transformative impact 2024 and beyond?
So this is something that I'm particularly excited about. I don't know if it's on your radar or other people's, but there are some extraordinary projects like the Earth Species Project, which is looking to use AI to map and infer the communication between and among species, so animal populations. What's really interesting, for me at least, is that this technology sits at the heart of how we might address some of the biggest challenges that we are encountering today. So ecosystemic destruction, climate disruption, the cannibalization of all of our resources, like all of the stuff that if we don't have a livable planet, none of this is going to matter, because if you don't have the resources to be able to fund and drive technological expansion, you know, we need electricity, we need the hardware, we need the minerals. If we don't have any of that, we're going to be stuck in terms of, you know, what we can do with technology. So this kind of technology enables us potentially to understand the communication between species. So imagine you could communicate with whales or with fish or with birds, for instance, you know, any of these things. And Asa Raskin and his team at Earth Species Project are doing extraordinary work. There are others as well in mapping this. Of course, then it creates another problem, which is if you wanted to, for instance, target specific kinds of fish to be able to fish them to extinction, you can do it because you can summon them potentially. I mean, this is in the realm of imagination right now, but again, it's the augmentation of human capacity for the flourishing of life or for the destruction. And I think the real question right now is, which path do we want to orient towards? Is it towards a flourishing future for all, or is it to the decimation and detriment of all life? And I know that's stark, but that's where we find ourselves. And I believe in the fundamental capacity for good choices, for creativity, and for envisioning a world in which we all get to flourish. So that for me is the seed at this moment. Where do we go from here?
That's the question, but it was great talking to you, Nathalie. I hope you and I will make good choices and our leaders will make good choices. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.